Welcome to our deep dive. This time we're going all the way back to 1888 and into the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London to explore one of history's most enduring mysteries, Jack the Ripper. More than a century later, this case still fascinates us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a story that captures the imagination, a true crime puzzle with twists and turns that would rival any fictional thriller.
We're going to be diving deep into the sources for this one: newspaper accounts, witness testimonies, police reports, and of course the letters, allegedly, from the Ripper himself, trying to piece together what we know and perhaps even more importantly, what we don't know.
Because with a case like this, the unknowns, the gaps in our knowledge, those are often the things that fuel the most speculation and debate.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1888. We're in London's East End. Not exactly known for its luxury or refinement.
It was a place of stark contrasts, really.
Yeah.
We had skilled immigrants drawn to the area for work, looking for a new life, a chance to make their fortune.
Right next door, too.
Right. But they're living in the midst of abject poverty, violence, crime. It was a breeding ground for all sorts of social ills.
And this is where the story of Jack the Ripper unfolds. The sources really highlight how the East End's social dynamics played into these murders. Prostitution was widespread, but of course viewed by society at the time as immoral.
Exactly. So when these killings started, and they were specifically targeting women in this line of work, it sent shockwaves through London.
It wasn't just another crime in a rough neighborhood. This was something different, something that gripped the city in fear.
And what's so fascinating is that we have a very specific time frame and location for these murders.
Yeah, the sources lay out what are often called the canonical five murders, all happening between August and September of 1888, all within a tight radius in the Whitechapel district of the East End.
These are the five that most experts agree were committed by the same person because of the similarities in the crimes, the MO, and that concentrated geographic location.
And the details are brutal. We're talking victims who were savagely attacked, often with their throats slashed and their bodies mutilated.
It was the level of brutality, the sheer savagery of it all that really set these murders apart.
And get this, before the name Jack the Ripper took hold, there was another name floating around for the killer: Leather Apron. Sounds like something straight out of a Penny Dreadful, doesn't it?
It does, and that nickname, the Leather Apron, speaks volumes about the atmosphere of fear and suspicion that surrounded the case. It really captures the mood of the time.
All sorts of rumors were swirling, people were terrified.
Absolutely, and the police were under immense pressure to catch the killer.
You know, I'm looking through the sources and I noticed something that I wanted to ask you about. There's a mention of a woman named Emma Smith attacked and killed earlier that same year in April 1888. So even before the Ripper's reign of terror began.
Oh, yes, Emma Smith. A tragic case.
But was this just another unfortunate incident in a dangerous place, or could it be connected somehow?
Well, that's where it gets interesting, because while violence against women was sadly all too common in the East End, these Ripper murders, they were different. The level of brutality, the specific way the bodies were mutilated, the removal of organs, it all pointed to something more deliberate, more sinister. It wasn't just about rage or robbery. There seemed to be a purpose behind the violence, something that went beyond mere aggression.
Yeah, that detail about the organs really stood out to me in the sources. The removal of the uterus and kidneys, in some cases, it's chilling. It wasn't just random violence.
Exactly. And that detail led some investigators to believe that the Ripper might have possessed some anatomical knowledge. The precision with which those organs were removed suggested someone who knew what they were doing. Maybe a butcher, a doctor, or at least someone with access to medical texts.
So we're not talking about some random thug lashing out in anger. This was someone who was methodical, deliberate.
Precisely, and that added a whole new layer of complexity to the investigation.
It makes it seem even more calculated, like he was trying to send a message with these killings.
And speaking of messages, we can't forget about the letters.
You mean those letters supposedly written by Jack himself to Scotland Yard? The ones that gave him his name?
Exactly. The name Jack the Ripper originates from one of those letters. But here's the thing. The authenticity of those letters is still fiercely debated.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Some experts believe they were hoaxes, potentially written by journalists eager to sell newspapers to sensationalize the story.
I mean, that makes sense. It was a time when newspapers were really starting to understand the power of a good headline.
And what better headline than Jack the Ripper Strikes Again?
But that raises some big questions about the evidence, doesn't it? If we can't even be sure about the letters, how can we be sure about anything?
It throws a wrench into the whole investigation.
Oh.
That's for sure. I mean, if the most famous piece of evidence, the one that gave the killer his name, might be a fake, what else could be fabricated?
It makes you question everything you think you know.
And that's the challenge with a case like this. Separating fact from fiction, rumor from reality.
Mm.
It's like trying to navigate through a dense fog.
And the fog gets even thicker when you start looking at the list of suspects.
Oh, the suspects. Where do we even begin?
We've got Walter Sickert, the famous Victorian painter.
Right, a shocking possibility.
Then there's mention of a Polish immigrant.
Playing into the anxieties of the time, the fear of outsiders.
And then, of course, there's the theory about a royal connection.
Ah, yes, the ultimate taboo. The scandal that could shake the monarchy to its core.
It's amazing how each era's fears and anxieties find their way into the Ripper theories.
It's almost as if we project our own anxieties onto the unknown, trying to make sense of the chaos through the lens of our own fears.
And with over 100 suspects put forward over the years, it's clear that the Ripper case has become a blank canvas onto which people can project their own theories and interpretations.
It's a Rorschach test for the collective imagination.
And it's that enduring fascination that keeps us coming back to this case over and over again, trying to piece together the puzzle even after all these years.
Because maybe, just maybe, somewhere in those fragments of evidence and those whispers from the past lies the key to unlocking the mystery of Jack the Ripper.
Or maybe the mystery itself is what keeps us captivated.
The unknown, the unanswered questions, those are often the things that hold the most power over our imaginations. It's almost like those royal theories tap into some deep-seated unease about power structures, you know? Like we want to believe that even the most untouchable figures could have a dark secret.
Yeah, it's a fascinating psychological element, isn't it? But with so many suspects, so much speculation, I mean, has there ever been a real push to get more concrete information?
There has actually. The sources mentioned a detective, Trevor Marriott, who tried to access uncensored police files on the case back in 2011.
Wow, really? That recently? What happened? Did he find anything new?
His request was denied. And get this, the reason they gave was that the files contain information about police informants, some of whom might still be active today.
Seriously, I had no idea the case was still considered that sensitive after all this time. It's like we're still living in the shadow of Jack the Ripper even in the 21st century.
It speaks to the enduring power of this case, doesn't it? And the fact that it remains unsolved.
I mean, if they're protecting informants, that means those files could contain some pretty explosive revelations.
Exactly. And imagine the implications. If some of those informants are still alive, releasing, that information could compromise ongoing investigations and potentially put lives at risk.
It's a chilling thought that the ripples from these murders are still being felt today.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder what secrets those files hold. What pieces of the puzzle might be hidden in there.
Well, even if we can't unlock all the secrets of the case, maybe we can still learn something from it. The sources mention how the Ripper case has inspired countless books, movies, TV shows.
Oh, it's become a cultural phenomenon, hasn't it?
Why do you think we're still so fascinated by this case after all these years?
I think there are a few reasons.
Huh.
One is the obvious appeal of the unsolved mystery, the puzzle that everyone wants to crack. We love trying to figure things out, don't we?
Absolutely. And there's something about the Victorian era itself that adds to the intrigue.
Well, definitely. That time of immense social change, the contrast between the opulence of the upper class and the squalor of the East End, the gaslit streets, the fog, it's a setting ripe for storytelling.
And then there's the psychological aspect of it all. The brutality of the crimes, the mystery surrounding the killer's identity.
It taps into some very primal fears, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The fear of the unknown, the fear of violence, the fear of darkness.
Earlier, we were talking about the removal of specific organs and how that might point to someone with anatomical knowledge.
Right.
Did investigators ever explore the psychological implications of those mutilations? Was there any thought given to what kind of person would be drawn to that level of, well, for lack of a better word, precision?
Absolutely. That's a question that's been debated extensively over the years. Some experts believe those mutilations suggest a deep-seated hatred of women, possibly stemming from some personal trauma or a twisted ideology.
It's a disturbing thought, but it's important to try to understand those dark impulses, isn't it? If we want to prevent such horrors from happening again.
Exactly. And that's why the Ripper case continues to be studied and analyzed even today. It's not just about solving a historical mystery. It's about understanding the darkness that exists within humanity and finding ways to combat it.
So even though Jack the Ripper was never caught, his case has had a lasting impact on how we approach criminal investigations even today.
Without a doubt, the Ripper case forced law enforcement to confront the idea of a serial killer, someone who deliberately targets victims based on specific characteristics. It really changed the way we think about criminal behavior.
And it highlighted the importance of forensic evidence, even though the technology back then was nowhere near as advanced as what we have today.
Imagine if the Ripper were to strike today with all our modern technology and investigative techniques. Would we be able to catch him?
It's a question that's been posed by many true crime enthusiasts.
On the one hand, we have DNA analysis surveillance cameras, sophisticated databases that can track patterns and identify potential suspects. It seems like we'd have a much better chance.
So you're saying he wouldn't stand a chance?
Well, I wouldn't be so sure. We can't forget that human behavior is complex and unpredictable. Even with all the tools at our disposal, there's always the element of human error of the unknown.
So even in the 21st century, a figure like Jack the Ripper could still pose a significant challenge.
Absolutely.
Huh.
And that, I think, is part of what makes this case so enduringly fascinating. It reminds us that even in a world of advanced technology, there are still mysteries we may never solve, and darkness we may never fully comprehend.
It's like he represents that part of us that we don't want to acknowledge, the darkness that lurks beneath the surface.
And that idea of the surface is particularly relevant when you think about the social context of these murders.
Yeah.
The East End, the poverty, the prostitution. It was a world that existed in the shadows of Victorian society.
You know, it makes you wonder if the Ripper deliberately chose those victims because he knew they were less likely to be missed or that their deaths wouldn't cause as much of a stir.
That's a theory that's been explored by a lot of historians and criminologists. The idea that the Ripper was drawn to the vulnerability of these women, their marginalized status in society.
It's a reminder of how social inequality and prejudice can shape not just our perceptions, but also the way justice is served.
Or not served, as the case may be. The legacy of Jack the Ripper isn't just about the murders themselves, but also about the social injustices that allowed them to happen.
It's a dark chapter in history, for sure. So we've got this unsolved mystery, a chilling glimpse into Victorian London, and some uncomfortable truths about social injustice. No wonder the Ripper case continues to fascinate us.
It's a story that has it all, doesn't it? Mystery, intrigue, horror, social commentary.
The sources mention how it's inspired countless books, movies, TV shows. Why do you think we keep coming back to this story, retelling it, reimagining it?
I think it's that human desire to make sense of the senseless, to try to understand what drives someone to commit such horrific acts.
Yeah.
We want to believe that there's a reason, a logic behind it all.
And maybe by exploring those dark corners of history, by trying to understand the motivations of someone like Jack the Ripper, we can learn something about ourselves.
About the choices we make, the kind of world we want to live in. Maybe it's a way of confronting our own darkness.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've delved into the historical context, the gruesome details, the suspects, the social implications. It's clear that Jack the Ripper, despite remaining a shadow, has left an indelible mark on our collective consciousness.
He's become a symbol of the unknown, of the darkness that lurks within us all.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've explored the facts, the theories, the speculation, but ultimately the question that lingers is this. What is it about Jack the Ripper, even today, that continues to hold such a grip on our imagination? Is it the unsolved mystery, the brutal nature of the crimes, the glimpse into a bygone era? Or is it something even deeper, something about the human condition that we still struggle to understand?
Perhaps the answer is different for each of us. But in grappling with that question, we might just come a little closer to understanding the enduring legacy of this enigmatic figure and the darkness he represents.
Well, that's all the time we have for a deep dive into the world of Jack the Ripper. We hope you found this exploration as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did.
Remember, the shadows of the past can often illuminate the present.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the light on.